Hello there, you perfectly lovely people. My name is Sarah, and this evening I am reading chapter 15 from 101 Dalmatians by Dodie Smith, and this chapter is called Miracle Needed. Last lap before supper, said Pongo as he started off again across the moonlit fields. It was the most cheering thing he could have said, for the 97 puppies were now extremely hungry. He had guessed this because he was hungry himself, and so was Mrs., but she was feeling too peaceful to mind. They went on for nearly 2 miles, and then Pongo saw a long row of cottage roofs just across the fields. This should be it, he said. What is that glow in the sky beyond the rooftops? Asked Mrs. Pongo was puzzled. He'd seen such a glow in the sky over towns which had many lights, but never over a village. And this was a very bright glow. Perhaps it's a larger place than we expected it to be, he said, and did not feel it would be safe to go any nearer until some dog came to meet him. He called a halt and barked news of their arrival. He was answered at once by a bark that said, "Wait where you are, I am coming." And though he didn't tell Mrs., Pongo felt that there was something odd about the bark that answered him. For one thing, there was no cheerful words of welcome. Soon a graceful red setter came dashing towards them. They guessed, even before she spoke, that something was very wrong. "The bakery is on fire," she gasped. The blaze, due to a faulty chimney, had begun only a few minutes before. The fire engines had not arrived yet. No one had been hurt, but the bakehouse was full of flames and smoke, and the food spread out for the Dalmatians was burnt. "There's nothing for you to eat and nowhere for you to sleep," moaned the poor setter, as she was hysterical. "And the village streets are full of people." She looked pitifully at Mrs. "And your poor hungry puppies." The strange thing was that Mrs. felt quite calm. She tried to comfort the setter, saying that they would go to some barn. "But no arrangements are made," wailed the setter, "and there's no spare food anywhere. All the village dogs brought what they could do to the bakery." Then came a shrill whistle. "My pet is calling me," said the setter. "He's the doctor here. There's no dog at the bakery, so I was chosen to arrange everything because I took first prize in a dog show. And now I've failed you." "You've not failed us," said Mrs. "No one could say the fire was an act of dog. Go back to your pet. Don't worry. We shall simply go to the next village." "Really?" said the setter, gasping again, but with relief. Mrs. kissed her on the nose. "Off with you, my dear, and don't give the matter any thought. Thank you for all that you did." The whistle came again, and the setter ran off, wildly waving her feathered tail. "Feather-brained as well as feather-tailed," said Pongo. "Just very young," said Mrs. gently. "I doubt if she's had a family yet. Well, on to the next village." "Thank you for being so brave, dear Mrs.," said Pongo. "But where is the next village?" "In the country, there are villages in every direction," said Mrs. brightly. Desperately worried though he was, Pongo smiled lovingly at her. Then he said, "We will go to the road now." "But what about the traffic, Pongo?" "We shall not be very long on the road," said Pongo. Then he told her what he had decided. Even if the next village should only be a few miles away, many of the pups were too tired and too hungry to get there. Some of them were already asleep on the frozen ground, and every minute it was getting colder. "And even if we could get to the next village, where would we sleep, Mrs.? What should we eat with no plans made ahead? We must give in, my dear. Come, wake the pups. Quick march, everyone." The waking pups whimpered and shivered, and Mrs. saw that even the strongest pups were now wretchedly cold. So she helped Pongo to make them all march briskly. Then she whispered, "But how do we give in, Pongo?" Pongo said, "We must go into the village and find the police station." Mrs. stared at him in horror. "No, Pongo, no! The police will take the puppies from us." "But they will feed us, Mrs., and perhaps we shall be kept together until Mr. Dearly has been told all about us. They'll have read the papers. They'll know we are the missing Dalmatians." "But we are not Dalmatians any more, Pongo," cried Mrs. "We are black." think they'll think we're ordinary stray dogs, and we're illegal 99 dogs without collars. We shall be put in prison. No, missus, but Pongo was shaken. He had forgotten that they were now black dogs. Suppose the police did not recognise them. Suppose the dearlies were never told about them. What happened to stray dogs that no one claimed? Oh, please, Pongo, I beg you, cried Mrs. Let us go on with our journey. I know it'll be all right. They had now reached the road and were on the edge of the village. Pongo was faced with a terrible choice, but it seemed to him wiser to trust the police than to lead the hungry, exhausted puppies into the bitter winter night. Mrs. Dear Mrs., we must go to the police station, he said, and turned towards the village. They could now see the burning bakery, and at that very moment, a huge flame leapt up through the roof. By its light, Pongo saw a whole village street, with the villagers making a human chain to hand along buckets of water. He also saw something else, which made him stop dead, shouting, "Halt!" at the top of his bark. In front of the burning bakery was a great striped black and white cat, and with it was Cruella de Vil, standing right up on the roof of the car, where she had climbed to get a good view of the fire. Her white face and absolutely simple white mink coat no longer looked white. From head to foot she was bathed in the red gold flicker of the flames. And as they leapt higher and higher, she clapped her hands in delight. The next instant there was a wild clamour of bells as the fire engine arrived at last. The noise, the flames, and above all, the sight of Cruella were too much for many of the puppies. Squealing in terror, they turned and they fled, with Pongo, Mrs. and Lucky desperately trying to call them to order. Fortunately, the clamour from the fire engine prevented anyone in the village hearing the barking and the yapping, and after a little while, the terrified pups obeyed Pongo's orders and stopped their headlong flight. They were very shamefaced, as Pongo told them that though he had quite understood how they felt, they must never, never, never behave in such a panic-stricken way, and must always, always obey orders instantly. Then he praised the pups who had stuck to the cad-pig's cart, praised Patch for staying close to the cad-pig, and rescued Roly-Poly from a ditch and counted the pups carefully. He did all this as hurriedly as possible, for he knew now that they must press on with their journey. There was no way they could get to the police station without passing Cruella de Vil. Their plight was now worse than ever. They not only had to face the dangers of hunger and cold, there was the added danger of Cruella. They knew from the direction her car was facing that their enemy must have already been to Hell Hall, learned they'd escaped, and now be on her way back to London. At any moment she might leave the fire and overtake them. If only they could have left the road and travelled by the fields again. But there were now woods on either side of the road, woods so thick that the army could not have kept together. But we can hide in there and see the car's headlights, said Pongo, and explained this to the puppies. Oh, that wasn't a Pongo voice. Then the army was on the march again. At least the pups are warm now, said Mrs., and they have forgotten how tired and hungry they are. It will be all right, Pongo. The pace was certainly good for a couple of miles, then got slower and slower. The puppies will have to rest, said Mrs., and this is a good place for it. There was now a wide grassy verge on the road. The moment Pongo called a halt, the pups sank down on the frosty grass. Many of them at once fell asleep. They ought not to sleep, said Pongo anxiously. Oh, let them, just for a little while, said Mrs. The cad-pig was not asleep. She sat in her cart and said, Will there be a barn soon with kind cows and warm milk? I'm sure there will be something nice, said Mrs. Snuggle down in your hay, my darling. Pongo, how strangely quiet it is. They could no longer hear any sounds from the village. No breath of wind rustled the grass or stirred the trees. The world seemed frozen into a silvery, silent stillness. Something soft and fluffy touched Pongo's head, something that puzzled him. Then he realised what it was. Mrs. whispered, Look, Pongo, look at the puppies. Tiny white dots were appearing on the black sooty coats as the snow had begun to fall. Mrs. said, smiling, "Instead of being white pups with black spots, they're turning into black pups with white spots. Only soon they'll be all white. How soft and gentle the snow is." Bongo was not smiling. He cried, "If they sleep on until this has covered them, they will never wake. They will freeze to death beneath the soft, gentle snow. Oh, wake up, pups, wake up!" By now, every pup but Lucky and the Cadpig had fallen into a deep, exhausted sleep. Lucky helped his parents to rouse them, and the Cadpig helped too, sitting up in her cart and yapping piercingly. The poor pups begged to be left on to sleep, and those who tottered on to their feet soon tottered off them again. "We shall never get them going," said Pongo desperately. For a moment the Cadpig stopped yapping, and there was a sudden silence. Then, from the village behind them, came the strident blare of the loudest motor horn in England. Oh my goodness. They're so nearly home. This is crazy. Anyway, don't you worry, because I think exciting things might happen again tomorrow night. I hope you've had a nice wash. I hope you've cleaned your teeth. I hope you've given your hands a jolly good scrub. And I hope you're going to snuggle into your bed and give yourself a great big cuddle, because you really deserve it. Hope to see you tomorrow. Night, night.